Conventional wisdom is you have to hear 100 no's to get a yes. I think that that's bullshit, but it is close. You have to practice your pitch 100 times. I don't mean you in front of Zoom by yourself or you in front of your mom. I need you to really pitch. I need you to embarrass the shit out of yourself. Because the reality is whatever question they ask, whatever they threw at you, like you're going to nail it next time.
Welcome to Money Moves, the show about raising money, making great investments, and building venture scale businesses. I'm Neil Devani, your host and the founder of Necessary Ventures, a firm investing in what the world needs. Each week, we'll talk to folks who have raised anywhere from $10 million up to billions of dollars. We'll learn how they return multiples of 10x to 100x or more to their investors. We dive into their stories, uncovering what worked and what didn't, learning from real experiences to understand the journeys of raising capital and rapidly scaling a business. Money Moves isn't just for those already in the game. It's also for anyone interested in the mechanics of startups and venture capital. Whether you want to raise money, make better investments, or just understand how it all works, Money Moves gives you the insights and advice you need to succeed. So join us each week and hear from those who've been through it all and learn from their journeys. All right, Marty, thank you so much for joining me for an episode of Money Moves.
No, thanks for having me, man. I'm excited.
I have so many things I want to ask you about your experience with previous companies, your experience as a VC. The first thing I want to do is talk about agree.com. And I saw you posted something about this, but the first question everyone probably asks is, do we need another DocuSign? Like, why do we need agree.com? So I want to just start there, hit it right on the head. What's the difference? Why do we need agree.com?
Yeah, no, I think we'll get into this more too as we talk about Agree, but this is one of those things where I will use DocuSign as an anchor in the conversation today, but if you and I talk about Agree 3 years from now, like DocuSign's not the conversation here. What we really need are tools to help us recognize revenue faster. So anyone who signs something and at the end of that signature moves money. And this is everything from founders getting investment from their investors, right? You sign a safe. This is anyone that's moving into a new apartment or buying a new home. You sign docs and then you get the keys after you make a payment. Anybody that's building a business and they send a sales contract to a client, right? So all of our biggest things in life and in business, right? They start with a signature and then they go to a payment, and that process is completely fragmented and disjointed. So it's really about like AR automation and money movement. And it just so happens that it starts with a signature. So we start with a signature. So we think the signature is critically important. It seems odd to me in 2024. If we know the adage, the deal's not done until the wire hits, if that's true, why does every e-signature player stop at signature? Like that seems silly to me. So I look at it less like, hey, we're just entering the e-sig market. Because even Google this week released e-sig within Google Docs. So it's like, it's just a commodity feature. It's a feature more than it is a standalone business. So we thought like, let's enter the market. Let's do it where it matters most. And let's make this more about fintech than signature.
That makes a lot of sense. I guess the next obvious question would be, you've got a lot of people working on that separately from the electronic signature or the document management kind of space, people who are working on bill pay, on payment solutions, B2B payments. How do you think about that space then as where the innovation is needed?
Yeah, and I guess where I get frustrated, this is a classic bundling, unbundling, and here we're starting with it being unbundled and we're making the argument that it should be bundled. But why? In 2024, e-signature is a feature, not a business. You wouldn't build DocuSign today as DocuSign. Invoicing, you wouldn't build Harvest today as invoicing is a commodity feature. So these are just features. Payment processing is a feature. Payment collections is a feature. Redlining and editing and collaborating docs is a feature. But when you put them all together and you bundle them, you've got a pretty robust suite of a utility that becomes this like little collaborative environment between like the critical parts or functions of a business that moves the majority of its revenue through a contract. And this is sales, legal, and finance, right? Because sales kicking off the relationship with a new client, and we'll send them a contract to sign. But legal wants to know, eyeballs on, if anything was changed or redlined on that contract. And then finance obviously needs to know if that was executed and when an invoice or purchase order is created against it. But these three siloed teams, they live in their own disparate systems. The process is super manual today. Anybody that works in a sales environment knows that they have to hand off that executed document to finance. They have to manually extract the payment terms out, create an invoice, send an invoice. It's really weird for me as the customer because I worked with the sales rep to get this far. And then all of a sudden, some new person from finance jumps into the conversation, sends me an invoice, gets really aggressive when I miss the net 45. So the whole process is kind of convoluted. A lot of people refer to it as like you have to duct tape the solutions together. So it just made sense to us that like it's like I need to kind of compete against Bill.com, kind of compete against DocuSign, bring them together, but really just like a new way for us to get revenue from our clients into our organization, like quicker, faster, more efficiently than any time we've done before.
I love that as a headline, as like the North Star, right? The idea is to move money faster, right? And bring it into the company faster. And you can get alignment from multiple departments around that when you start to move up to like the CFO or the COO who's thinking about how do I coordinate everyone more efficiently.
Well, yeah, and again, just big value problem thinking the big vision of agree.com. So we're big proponents on the e-signature because we believe that the contents of the contract are it's the source of truth. Because in a contract that moves money are all the payment terms. So who pays who is in that contract, how much they pay is in that contract. Payment terms or stipulations are in that contract. Net 45, net 60, net 90, those are in that contract. Those are just variables. And those variables are the same variables you would need to create an invoice. So like going from contract content to invoice, that's automatic and dynamic now. No more human in the loop, no more human error, no more human inefficiency being passed from one team to another. Like we have all of that data. That should just happen naturally. And then if you have an invoice, it's just obviously it's another natural progression that you do secure payment processing on top of that invoice. But it's like we're just in a position where if you can own the contents of the contract, it affords you a view into an organization that almost no other partner has, including a company's primary bank, because you know a lot. You know open and close rates, right? Because I know how many contracts were sent, how many of them actually got signed, how many of them got countersigned. I know of those contracts, how many got invoiced, how fast the invoices got paid, how many of them never got paid, how many of the projects kicked off. So I know all the historicals on the company at an intimate level, and I know all of the outstanding. So how many contracts are out for signature, how many invoices are out for payment. You end up getting a really interesting holistic view, and that puts you in a position where I think you kind of alluded to this. You're doing more CFO tooling than you're doing anything else.
That is the most magical description of contracts I have ever heard. I'm enamored. The lawyer in me, the law student in me is like, yeah, this is exactly what we need. This is awesome.
Yeah, well, this is why, again, I'm not going to say that we're going to go build a better ironclad because that's a very specific tool that does a very specific thing for mostly folks that work on the legal side. But there's a lot of attributes within ironclad that we bring in, like on a light level into Agree, but like our contract management tools, they really need to be revenue tools. And I don't think people traditionally thought about that way. Our e-signature platforms need to be revenue platforms. And I don't think people thought about that way. Obviously, invoicing tools are tied to revenue, but full cycle, bring them all together. Like, again, we live in an era of OCR, generative AI, big data. Like these things are starting to make more sense now, but we can understand why 22 years ago, when we just got comfortable with signing things, we just got comfortable with transacting online, like they would have been disparate. They just stayed disparate for too long.
What was the impetus or the moment where you were like, yes, I got to go build this company?
Yeah, there's two in the story. The first is we've got a small fund ourselves, the Adventure Fund, $10 million fund. Just noticed, I signed a lot of safe documents, and it's interesting, a safe, because a safe is a lot like a commercial or residential lease agreement where the document, the contract is the invoice, right? Like I don't sign a safe and then a founder doesn't like invoice me for the investment. You don't sign a lease agreement and the landlord doesn't invoice you for the security deposit. Like the document itself is an invoice. Like, oh, well, that's really interesting that none of the invoicing platforms know how to handle that. They don't know how to handle a non-invoice where the contract is the invoice. So that was interesting to me. And then the way that founders, all of them, 100% of the ones I've worked with and the ones that I've talked to through other investors, they do everything the same way. As soon as they get the safe document signed, they email over their account routing number because obviously they want the wire and they want to receive the funds. But like that is the most insecure, the least secure thing you could possibly do because you're going to leave yourself open to man-in-the-middle attacks. We're like, that's very vulnerable sort of financial data that you're sending in plain text over email. We're like, oh, wow, it's the industry standard to do like the least secure possible thing you can do with like your financial information. Like that's cool that we all just accepted that as the status quo. And then the last one was I was invested in a startup that got acquired by Brex. They'd asked me to join as a part of the acquisition to help build out spend management. And we were doing bill pay over there. And this was early January 2020. And Brex had said, hey, spare no expense. Use the best technology to make this the best possible platform. Because they were leading the charge against like Mercury and Ramp on expense management. So they were going to be first to market and they wanted the best experience. And so Google was the best at parsing invoice data for bill payments. And so we were using OCR technology and it was 85 to 87% accurate and reliable. And I just thought, well, that's weird. We still need a huge amount of like human in the loop to get this thing over the line. But like for financial services, 87% is the best we can do. And then for anyone listening, you kind of know what happens later that summer. We get introduced to the GPT-3 beta and then our little friend generative AI. And the whole world at that moment's kind of asking, especially in the venture world, like generative AI plus what? But for me, it was generative AI plus OCR equals what? And I immediately called my buddy Will and said, hey, this is wasted on invoices. Like we started throwing a bunch of contracts on it, specifically contracts that had financial information within them, like an invoice. And then the unlock was just massive. And I can ramble about this one forever, but the quick things I'll say is immediately we were able to identify all the input fields in a document. So those days of opening up a DocuSign and manually dropping labels over, like completely gone. We could extract all the contents of a contract, every hyphen, every bullet, every semicolon, which means we can render it back into the app, which you'd ask why, because we're just so used to PDF overlays, because now it's fully collaborative. Like now we can edit it, we can redline it. Like when you make a mistake, no more going back to Word and starting the Microsoft or the DocuSign process all over again. So those were all cool things. But then it's that thing I alluded to in the beginning. Extracting that content meant like powerful amounts of data. And one of them was kicking off invoices and then processing payments.
It makes a ton of sense. Amazing vision. I really like it, especially because it is one of those that on the very surface, you don't see all of the depth, right? It's a true iceberg of a vision. And I can see so much value having dealt with a lot of these things myself, like how much time and money and energy you're going to save and how much more value you can create by having this data be structured, collaborative, et cetera. So it's really great. How did you guys get the domain? It's a great domain.
Yeah. So we knew the name was right, agree. We knew like as a noun, as a verb, like we loved agree. We had contemplated a million other different names. There was nothing as strong. And for anyone watching, this is a small time box moment, but go to the biggest dinosaur in the room, DocuSign.com right now, and you will notice the word they lead with is now agree. It's everything you need to agree. So we know that we're onto something. We hope we inspired them, but we know that we've at least got their attention. But for agree.com, we had a different TLD before. I think it was like agree.xyz. And then one day we're fundraising for the pre-seed, and my co-founder Will, just after the end of a Zoom, was just like, hey, Marty, you ever been to agree.com? I was like, no, actually never thought to go. I know it seems silly, but he's like, me neither. Maybe we should, because we're calling ourselves Agree. Like the investor on the other side, they might just assume it's agree.com. And if they win, what if it's a porn site, or like, we don't know what's on the other side of that? Like, okay, makes sense. Let's do it right now. It was clear that it was kind of like an older website. I went down to the footer, the copyright side said 2018. So I was like, okay, this thing hasn't been truly loved in a while. Went to the terms of service and then hunted for that like legal entity, found that little LLC, went on LinkedIn, found the entity, found the CEO, slid into his DMs. And I'd acquired a few premium domains in the past. I actually owned Marty.com. But I went in and I just made him an offer where I knew how to negotiate this, where I want to pay the least I can, but I can't be insulting or I'm never going to hear from him again. But I got pretty close and he just wrote me back and said, no, but you're close enough that I'll take a call with you. And so we got on a call, and then it took about 4 months. But this was a person you could tell had a little bit higher net worth, wasn't going to be just, magically swept off their feet because we're throwing some money their way. But you could tell the domain meant something special to them. And so the part of the pitch was like, we're going to do something epic and awesome with this. And you being the original owner of it you're going to be able to tell a really cool story that you are part of this too. And I want to believe that because now we own the domain that he got really excited about that.
I love it. Did you have to put some equity in that? Was it all cash? Like, how did you do that?
It was all cash. We did give him a little bit of equity. We just felt that that was important. Again, we kind of wanted him like to be a part of it, to buy in as well.
Yeah, it's like a hot topic right now with chat.com and that
Yeah.
transaction. I don't know if you saw like
Yeah, because
Tom
that was
Rich's
all
post.
equity, I believe, or mostly equity for open. But hey, that's a good amount of equity to have for
Good equity.
for a great company. And then I know friend.com was kind of a buy now, pay later sort of situation. But yeah, it's always it was we agreed not to disclose the price of the domain, but it was enough that we had the capital to just acquire it in cash.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, congrats. I want to go back to some of your previous companies. You've had several companies that you've built and sold, in addition to an amazing investing track record. But let's start with the first company you ever started. Take us back to that moment where you said, I'm going to be an entrepreneur and start a company.
Yeah, no, this is a good one because I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm a small business owner, and it's like, what's the difference sometimes? But it's 2006. A buddy of mine, Alex, he and I we're pretty darn good at visual design. So we're designers and we are pretty darn good at HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And this is 2006. Now, JavaScript's a dirty word. It's almost like saying crypto today. Like some people freaking love it. And then the rest of the world just like, no, it's full of security vulnerabilities. It's for drug trafficking. But it kind of felt like that's the way people looked at JavaScript. But there weren't that many people in the world that were really great at design and great at front-end development. And we just happened to be in that small cohort. And because of that, there was just so many opportunities that we ended up deciding to like start in the beginning, like a services agency, like a web design firm. And there was explosive growth in that time and everybody wanted something. And so that we went from kind of like 10x the size of the little thing overnight. Seemingly, the whole thing took 7 years, but immediately got on the radar of like big folks in Silicon Valley. We were based in Washington, D.C. But Google's a client, Mozilla's a client, eventually Apple's a client. They become our biggest client. We're doing a few $1 million a year with them. And then what we were doing with them was all around mobile. And this is leading up to the iPhone and leading up to the iPad and eventually leading up to the Apple Watch, but all like next generation stuff that like what we were building, like you couldn't even test it because the browser that it would eventually work on like just didn't exist yet. It was all like we're just designing to the spec, but it's like, hey, what will work in a watch before the watch exists? So imagine someone asking you to build a web interface for a device with a really slow processor, with a really archaic JavaScript engine, with a really small screen. Right? It's like, okay, they're not even telling you it's a watch. It's under NDA and black box kind of thing at Apple. It's like that's kind of a hard thing to design and build for. But that got acquired by Twitter specifically because, again, if we go back far enough, there's a moment in history before Elon, before Twitter's public. But Twitter, when they're going to go public, they have to file an S1. They have to make revenue. They have no idea how to do it. The obvious answer is ads, and obvious to them, obvious to everyone else. But Twitter back then, no photos, no videos, 140 characters. You can't have ads without photos and videos. So they need to bring in a whole bunch of talent really fast to build out sort of mobile capabilities. And so they acquired us for a little bit of that tech that we were working on with Apple, and then obviously just mobile talent.
Did you end up sticking around there? I think you were there for about a year.
1 year, met the 1 year cliff. And then I got a pretty cool opportunity to join the White House. And this was Obama's last term. So that kind of felt like a once in a lifetime opportunity. And it was this new thing that they'd stood up called the Presidential Innovation Fellow. So it also had kind of like a cool epic name to it. It's like, oh, I want to be a part of that.
I'm innovative. I can do this.
Yeah. Got into that, and I was like, oh, okay, this is a cool thing. I kind of wanted to leave anyway. There wasn't a lot for me to do personally at Twitter. I was kind of having my big head moment in my career, just walking around on the roof with a slushie. But went back to DC, did my time at the White House, and then it's a term position, so I knew that it was finite, and just started thinking like, okay, I'm in this now. I'm no longer a small business owner. I'm an entrepreneur with an exit, and I had my little taste of Silicon Valley. So there's no going back after that. What's the next one? What's this next startup going to be?
Well, then you built two, right? You built a co-working space, and then you built another company as well, Invite.
Yeah, there were a lot of things because again, we're a privileged position to be in, but obviously selling the company to Twitter gave us a little bit of disposable income, and we're like.
Did you raise any money for the company sold to Twitter?
No, because it started as a services company, right? It wasn't something you'd VC back, and then it was just like highly profitable. Like Apple alone, all the other clients more than paid for everything, and Apple was just like pure profit. So we're just young kids with way too much money on our hands. Like we had two of our conference tables, and today this probably seems not as impressive, but in 2007. This was a big deal. Like one of our conference tables was this custom made thing by this fashion designer, James Pierce, but as a ping pong table, it was $35,000. And then the pool table was like $45,000. And like he'd only ever,
$35,000 for a
yeah,
ping pong table is
yeah,
still,
made
that's still
made out
eye
of
popping.
pure walnut, handcrafted. There were only a few made ever, but like again, we were just rolling in it. But we had this beautiful space, 3,000 square foot in Washington D.C. that we didn't need all of it. And this is like WeWork wasn't a thing. Like it existed. There were like one of them in New York. So like the brand existed, but it wasn't the WeWork we know today. So the co-working concept, like no one had ever heard of that really. But like a few of us like were aware of this idea. And so we opened up one of the first co-working spaces, definitely the first one in Washington, D.C., this idea where like you charge people monthly for like a desk. Like our architect didn't understand this concept of like rip down all the walls and just like flood it with desks. They're just used to building for like lawyers and law firms. It's like, now we just need a few phone booths and desks and like lots of Wi-Fi. Yeah. But yeah, that was a fun time. And then, yeah, we were also building a fintech that turned into event tech. So you heard of Fast and Bolt, this idea of one click checkout. We were ahead of our time on that one as well, where Facebook had just released the Facebook OAuth, right? So one button click and you connect with Facebook. And it was super cool. Cambridge Analytica kind of destroyed everything. So like we don't do that anymore. But like Twitter had one click then, and a few other social networks like Dribbble created one. But we thought, hey, what if you connected with the Facebook button? We had a layer in between where you could create an account and store your credit card information. And anytime you hit that button, we would just process the payment because we had the credit card stored. And kind of the way Bolt and Fast work now. Even Link and Stripe, it's exactly what they do. It's like, but tied to the social OAuth. It's like, oh, that's really freaking cool. Yeah, like this is awesome. Let's do it. But the first place we applied it to was we just threw a bunch of parties. Like this is the way we're going to get users, and we charged, kind of like a frat keg party, $5 to get in for the red cup. We charged it for no other reason to get people to use the platform and test the payments product. We just threw these really fun parties, but what we did is inadvertently, because we made checkout so easy, and Facebook pre-Cambridge Analytica gave us like everything, it filled in your registration. So you didn't need to do like event registration anymore, which is kind of annoying. Even today, like in Luma and stuff, like I hate constantly refilling it out, even if I have a saved account. And the world, people just fell in love with it. Like, we want this. And that's eventually Eventbrite bought that.
Did you raise money for that one, or was that also bootstrapped?
Yeah. And then like these days, you call that like a small pre-seed. It was like, we just raised $1 million, and that's ended up all we needed. And when we went out to raise the next round, we got an offer from, there was really interesting things happening in the market that we were not clued into, because Spotify wanted to talk. Okay, I love Spotify. Like I'm in. Like, don't say no more. Spotify is just cool. I'd love to work at Spotify. The economics worked out. But it's like, why the hell does Spotify give a crap? And what we didn't know is that Pandora had just acquired Ticketfly, and they're gonna build like this like artist engine where like independent artists can sell concert tickets and monetize. And then Spotify got a little nervous. So they're like, hey, we need to build event ticketing. And they're like, okay, like, why don't we buy somebody that already kind of built an infrastructure and then either have them rebuild it or build it into Spotify platform. So like, oh, that's cool. And then what we didn't know is that behind the scenes, and Spotify didn't know this either, because they never did it. If you go to Spotify today, there is no buying of event ticketing. So it never happened. And the reason it didn't happen is Pandora and the Ticketfly thing, like, it's not working. It's falling apart. Pandora's going to bail. They're looking for a buyer. Eventbrite decides they're going to buy Ticketfly. And then they actually want to get into this space. And so that actually, like the Spotify thing, really heated up the conversation with Eventbrite. And so it worked out in our favor. I'd be kind of trite to call it like a bidding war, but we were able to like leverage the two conversations at the same time to our advantage.
I feel like I've heard that from numerous founders, right? Like maintaining those relationships, especially if you can have more than one, kind of create some heat. It's going to drive such a better outcome for you versus hitting a point where you're like, okay, now I want to sell, and you try to start from scratch. It's like almost impossible if you haven't built some connectivity and some sort of combination of people interested in what you're doing.
Yeah, and that's to your point, like starting relationships early. It used to be one of my biggest founder pieces of advice is I hate people that say like don't talk to investors if you're not raising. Like talk to anyone and everyone that'll talk to you, man. One, like on the investor thing, just get them to introduce you to portfolio companies. Those are customers. Like take those calls. But like Eventbrite, it was really flattering. I had a friend that worked there. I told them what we were working on, and they introduced us to the VP of strategy who liked it enough that we were only 3 months into building this thing. We hadn't even raised that first round of funding yet, and they flew us out. They wanted to meet with us. And we got to meet with Kevin Hartz, like founder of Eventbrite, and like in a conference room, and that was super flattering. It was like way too early. You know, they're like, yeah, this is a joke what you're building. You're not even in the, you don't even know anything about events. You're like, you think you're like half-assed fintech guys, and like Kevin Hartz is a real fintech guy, like sold to PayPal, Zoom. So like he's just kind of like secretly making fun of us, but hey, free trip to San Francisco, I'll take it. We stayed cool with them, and we stayed in contact with them. That VP of strategy eventually becomes the CFO, Randy Bufumo, and I'm just like sending him my quarterly updates and telling him what we're up to. And one of those updates really piqued his interest, and then that's when things got a little serious.
I love the detail on that story because we've interviewed a few founders now. And I do think the advice has been mixed around, do you talk to investors when you're not raising? But everyone does, on a consensus basis, agree we should be talking to potential acquirers early and just kind of keep those conversations open because you have no idea what can come from that. Maybe it's an investment, maybe it's a partnership, maybe it's an acquisition. But yeah, it sounds like you navigated that really well and showed them the value over time as you built it. And then you went on to stay at Eventbrite for a few years. They actually hung on to you for more than a year.
They treated me pretty well. Randy was great, gave me a lot of leads. He's very good at understanding that most early stage M&A like never goes well. Founders leave, product doesn't get integrated. Integrations of teams and technology are really hard. So he was really sensitive to that from the beginning, but gave me a super long leash. It was kind of like, tell me what you want to do that helps this company move forward. If those two things are in alignment, like we should make sure you do it. I was like, hey, I like this. This is fun. So it was a really fun place to work for a good amount of time. And then just kind of like my time was up. They were going through some transitions once they did eventually acquire Ticketfly. And then again, I just got lucky on timing. I leave in the middle of 2019, and then we all know what happens at the beginning of 2020. It is devastating to event ticketing when the pandemic hit. So it was tough for them. A lot of people got laid off, but kind of glad that I snuck out right before the madness ensued.
Yeah, I mean, you snuck out to start yet another company. You're three exits in at this point.
And
Before
this next
agree.com.
one, I don't get the credit for starting.
Okay.
My LinkedIn will be more boastful than reality, but two guys that I'd worked with in the past, Mike and Evan, they worked for me at the very first company. They were my co-founders and the one that sold to them. So I've known them for 15 years now. So they were my employees, and then one of them was my intern, and then they were my co-founders. And then the two of them went and did their own thing. And I felt a little left out, but I was still at Eventbrite, and they were like, "Hey, Marty, you want to write a check?" Yeah, it's a small check, $25,000, $50,000. And I was like, I'm in, whatever it is. Like, this is just going to be fun. And I rolled up my sleeves. I played kind of like pseudo product manager. There was just three of us, well, mostly them, and then me on the side while I was kind of living like a moderate retired life for a hot second. But they got an acquisition offer from Brex. And this was like, oh, okay, cool. And this is the one where they asked if I would join as well, because they kind of wanted the trifecta. It was a small team. It was an actual acquisition, but it was so small, like you might like wink and say like, oh, that's kind of an acqui-hire. I mean, not financially small, but like the team was super small and the product was early. But they did want like that full stack. They bring somebody with some product expertise, somebody with some design front end, and someone back end.
And so four companies, not including agree.com, that you were part of, that you helped sell. In none of those cases did you go raise a ton of money. You've always been kind of lean and capital efficient. What would you say is like the thing you learned about fundraising from those experiences, given that you haven't done a ton of it, but like, what did you take away from that?
Yeah, the first one, the one we sold to Eventbrite, that was kind of my first time really having to go out and raise capital. And so I learned the power of, I wouldn't call it FOMO, but like compounding interest, and not like interest in a financial term, but like interest, like people are excited, where nobody cares until they know somebody cares. And so everyone's just like, hey, cool idea, but don't know enough about the space or the market to know if I'm in. And then once I got one person, so we raised $1 million, and once somebody put in 250, that was like, oh, okay. And then getting the $1 million was super easy. Getting the 250 took what felt like a lifetime. But at the end of the day, we met over a cheeseburger, and he was just at the end of that cheeseburger, he's like, I'm in. And I was like, oh, how much? And 250. And then it all was to the races from there. So I learned that power. And then the thing that really annoyed me, we never ended up raising the next round, but this will never leave me, is I'm in a VC's office in Philadelphia. and they're loving it seemingly. I'm like 3 meetings in. I've been to their office now 3 times. And so I'm like, okay, I'm getting a little worried it's dragging out. So maybe they're not interested, but like, why do they keep meeting with me? I'm there for like hours, like 2 hours at a time. Like we're really getting into the strategy. But at one point we're talking about like, oh, Evite sucks. I think I mentioned that at some point, and it's old, it's archaic. And the guy kind of leans, he's an older guy, but he leans back in his chair, looks out the doorway, yells to the office manager, who's this older woman in her like 60s. He's like, Barb, this kid says Evite sucks. We use Evite for our holiday party. Does Evite suck? And then I realized at that moment my entire life is in Barb's hands. Right? Her answer to this question. And I was just like, oh, shit. Because I know if you're using it for like a company holiday party, it probably like it's not that it's good or it's bad. It doesn't not work. Right? It functions. Like, it's not a broken experience, right? It's just a multitude of other reasons why there's a better way. And so Barb says like, oh, it worked. And that was it. And I was like, and we never really got any further after that. I was like, well, freaking Barb, like Barb had my life. And so I make sure that never happens again, and that they really understand the problem, who the ICP is. Like I make sure that what I took away from that is I have to control the conversation. I have to control every single part of it. I can't let them go rogue or on their own in any way. I can't let them, and this seems it's going to sound condescending, and I don't mean it that way to any of the investors listening, but like, I can't let them go off on their own and start thinking or wondering what this could be or what it is, because the possibility of them getting that wrong or heading down the wrong path is just too high.
I think that's a really good point, actually, when it comes to fundraising, because there are a lot of investors, whether they're LPs, GPs, in other asset classes, who use these heuristics that are not kind of first principles thinking or very data-driven approaches, especially at the early stage, and you don't have much else. So yeah, you're going to ask your friend. We get this a lot with healthcare companies, right? Well, they'll like pitch someone, and the VC is not like deep in healthcare, and they'll ask their friend who's a doctor, and their friend who's a doctor is like, I don't need to do this. I don't want to, like, oh yeah, it's not a good idea. And that's just always the default. And yeah, there's obviously a lot of businesses that have done really well, despite the fact that doctors don't think they're great businesses. So yeah, Barb and doctors mean well, but maybe not the best proxy for diligence on if a customer wants the product.
The other one that I find too, in terms of like founder advice, is VCs they need to put you in a box, because their thesis is box driven, right? Like, so what are you? And then also for the really large institutional funds, the partners are box driven. So if you're a fintech, you talk to the fintech partner. If you're a legal tech, you talk to the legal tech. If you're a prop tech, there's a prop tech partner. So they need to know where to funnel you. So the first thing they're doing, you're not even realizing, they're putting you in a box, and you need to control that box, because what the heck is agree.com? Is it legal tech? You're talking about legal documents and contracts. Is it B2B SaaS? Is it, you mentioned lease agreement at some point. Is this landlord tooling? Is this prop tech? Like and then I'm like, no, it's none of it. It's fintech. And so, we'll probably get to this later too, but it's why we wanted a fintech fund to lead our pre-seed, because we didn't want any confusion there. And then we knew they would get it. We knew, especially this particular one, which was our dream investor, and we ended up getting them, which is great, Better Tomorrow Ventures, but specifically Sheil over there. But like, we knew that he's going to see the vision the way we would see it. And then we knew once he and Jake were stapled onto this thing, I'm never going to have this conversation again. This is a fintech.
Did you have a relationship with them before? Did you just know of them? Like, how did that come about?
Yeah, it's another great founder advice. Like, don't ask. I mean, this one's more classic, but don't ask for money when you need it. And so I got lucky because we had this little fund, a little $10 million fund. So my little Twitter network became a little more like VC centric. And so like Sheil and I at this point are like Twitter buds. He might not have used that word, but like in my world, we're Twitter buds. Like, but we ran into each other at Money 2020, and I'll never forget this, because it speaks to the power of like what a great guy he is, what a great networker. He actually sought me out. Like, we're across the bar. He goes, "Hey, you're Marty." Like I wanted to say hi to you, and I was just like, "You know me? Like you can match the face to the avatar." But I'm having like a celebrity moment. I'm like, "Oh my God, Sheil just said hi to me." But like, that's just why he's such a powerful sort of personality like that. But so when we were raising, again, slid into his DMs. Thankfully, like we had DM'd a few times before. I'd sent him some deals that we were doing, seeing if Better Tomorrow was ever interested. And so I think he just knew at the end of this, like, hey, that's like a decent dude over there. Like, if anything, like, I might not do a deal with him. I might not care about his startup, but like, I I at least, if I do slide into a DM, like better chances he's going to see it versus ignore it. Or if you're just coming in hot, being like, hey, I've never met you before, and I'm also asking you for money right now.
I think very highly of the both of them and of the firm. And I think of them also as the kind of people who are not going to just put you in a bucket, right? And try to think about what exactly are you doing? Why does it matter? Who does it matter to? And assess it from that kind of first principle as opposed to what I don't think it's just VCs. I think it's human beings generally, right? We try to just generalize because it's a faster way to learning and just put things into categories, into buckets and find patterns that may not exist. And that's where we create a lot of these cognitive errors. But those are some smart guys. They don't make those errors as much.
Yeah, which is why we were very flattered that when they even took the call, even thought about the deal, and then when they actually came in, we were just like, oh my gosh, this is dream come true.
Do you see the path forward with agree.com as different from the previous businesses in terms of thinking you're going to raise more capital, be more aggressive, or
Yeah.
how are you thinking about building the business?
I'll also say it's a privileged place to be again, and I knew this was going to be an issue at some point. So you had mentioned some of my past, and to some folks on LinkedIn, that's a pretty successful track record. Built a company, sold a company, but to a VC, it's like, whoa, this dude's a house flipper. I don't want to back this guy. I'm not going to get 100x return if he's going to like try to sell this thing to DocuSign for like 10, 20 million bucks. Like, wasn't you're thinking, hey, if you could build something at zero and sell it for 20 million bucks, that's a huge freaking win. But not when I just raised on like a 10, $20 million valuation. That's a zero win for the investor, right? Marty's going to do okay. So we get a few folks, and I knew I've already prepared for this one. But they're gonna be like, hey, is that the game here? We're not gonna label you, we're not gonna assume anything, but we want to ask the question. And it's never the intention to sell. We've got lucky because we timed the market pretty well. And a lot of these, like the event tech one, had we not sold to Eventbrite and kept going, it would have 100% died in the pandemic. There just would have been, we would have
Yeah.
been too cash strapped, never would have made it. So like, but again, I didn't know there's something pandemic. I got lucky. With this one though, to answer your question, yeah, it's immediately different in that we all know the logic still is it takes you about 10 years to get to that big exit. And the thing we all look for is like ringing that bell, right? Like, can this thing IPO? Can it do well in the public markets? The path between here and the bell, it's never been more clear to me. And now it's just like speed of execution. I just got to execute on this. But I know I have no doubts on what to build, who to build it for, and the order of operations in which to do it. And I've never had that before. Like now that's probably what scares me most. It's like, shoot, we just have to go. And in this, to your point earlier, that puts us in a position where we are going to be more of a capital intensive business, and we will be primarily in the game of fundraising. We don't have to, but we will raise a seed round in Q1, which will still have like 27 months of runway. So you're like, well, Marty, you don't need it. But again, my first advice, don't raise, when you need it, because that's a bad position to be in. But it's not about like how much I already have. It's just about how much we need to just move harder, faster. Like the big things that I need to build are going to be big and they're going to be expensive. Getting onto my own banking rails and having money transmitter licenses and having a banking partner, like those are going to be really expensive things to get and to maintain.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree 100%. It does seem also like this business is a much thicker wedge or like a more of a platform than some of the previous businesses. And so there's going to be a lot more value that accretes over time. And so you can build to a bigger outcome more easily versus the other businesses you may have had to navigate trickier questions around what's the next best adjacency to move into or the next, customer segment to go after or whatever it is.
Yeah, I know that what I like about this one too is it's another dangerous first time founder trap with you want to paint a really big picture and really big vision, but investors will see that as like lack of focus. Like, hey, do the one thing, dominate the one niche first. So yes, right. And we're hyper focused on who that ICP is and what we're going to do there. But what's great about this one is the compounding effects work again, where the more successful one component of it is, it just unlocks another really big component. And so an example there is I talked about extracting the contents of a contract and getting the variables to do invoices. So I'm going to do e-signature invoices and payments. I'm going to bite them all off at once and I have a good reason why. It's like, okay, that's a lot to chew, but we get that e-signature and invoices aren't hard anymore. So like, that's not that bad. You're trying to do payments. You're trying to do it for B2B SaaS sales teams. Okay, we believe that you can do that. And that's why we've got the pre-seed. But the next unlock further down the road is in that contract are those payment terms. They have requirements around them, like what you have to do to get the money, any stipulations, escrow kind of functionality, like what you hold the money, when you release the money. And Another 22-year-old dinosaur is escrow.com, and no one's come for them. And so we're well positioned to do it. But I'm not going to have that conversation right now, because like, let's take on DocuSign and Bill.com first, and then let's go after escrow.com. But you can see the natural progression there. And then if I really do have all of this interesting insights on a company's financial health, again, open close rates, historicals, future projections, I could do, and I have invoices, I could do invoice factoring. And so we can monetize really well there. But again, only works when I have a company that's been on our platform for a good period of time. We have a good amount of data, and we've got enough of them that even they, at their size and scale, want to take advantage of invoice factoring. But you can just see like, oh, these are massive building blocks on top of a really cool foundation.
Yeah, and it's a very logical sequencing, right, in terms of how you're building the building. I want to make sure in the time we have, we talk a little bit about your investing, because you've made some amazing investments. How did you get started in the investment world?
Yeah, wear many hats. I'll literally switch them now. We'll go to the
There we
adventure
go.
fund hat.
Perfect.
Yeah. So
You're so on brand.
sorry. I have no shame. I got another investor, a founder advice. You are a
You
walking
cannot have
billboard.
shame. Yeah.
You need to be a walking billboard. So sorry, I was too busy with the hat. What was the founder or the investor question?
How did you get started investing?
Yeah. So again, privileged spot, sold to Twitter, gave me a good amount of change in the bank. But they pulled me out of Washington, D.C. and planted me in Silicon Valley. What I think is one of the most interesting times. I think like the 2008 era, and these numbers I'm going to give like plus or minus 2 years, is really interesting. And then I get there in 2012, which again, this is like plus or minus 2 years. We're getting Coinbase, we're getting Airbnb, we're getting Uber, like a lot of really cool things are popping up. And so I have the opportunity to invest in some early stage startups and get into some funds, just because I got introduced to people and met people and meeting a lot of founders every day. They're always building something and doing something. And then you fast forward from 2012 to 2022, like 10 years, some of those companies went public. Some of them had really big exits or acquisitions. So I had like a tiny little track record, and I could go out and say, hey, who wants to go build something? But the real story is I have a text group with other angels, and there's like 6 of us, and we got to the point where when one person was in, like none of us even did diligence. We're like, I'm in. If Steve's in, I'm in. If Jonathan's in, I'm in. If JC's in, I'm in. And one day I was just like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we like made this official? And when they were like, well, Marty, if you do the work, we're in. And so I went to Google how to start an investment club. And they're like, that's not a real thing. What you're looking for is a fund. And then Carta sponsored link popped up. I'm like, oh, fund management, super made easy. Just pay us a shitload of money to do it. It's like, all right, I'm in. Let's do it. My co-founder and agree was my partner in crime in a venture fund too. So really what I said was, hey, Will, you go figure it out. And then Carta was, I like to make fun of them a lot, but they were great in setting up. They gave us a hell of a deal. I saw like Wishkoff recently said like it cost her $1 million to start her fund. It cost us $10,000. Like, and that's a lot of money.
Including like GP commit, some other things.
Yeah, I'm just like, that's exhaustive. I mean, she raised a much bigger fund than we did, but 5 times bigger. But yeah, $10,000 to get things up and running, and then you take that out of the management fee. I didn't come out of my pockets. And yeah, then we just got started and then got lucky. I mean, we've always been big on like find them super early. I want them before, our tagline is get them before Jason Calacanis, get them before YC demo day, because like they're already marked up at that point. But those are quintessentially, I think, what most people think of as early, like YC demo days early. It's like, no, like it's marked up like terribly. Like get them like before they even apply, but while they're applying, but before they got accepted, like that's when you really want them. And not to say like, end all be all is like getting into YC, but like just I think the spirit is find them super early. And so the one breakout hit that we have, or the biggest breakout hit in the early stage side, is Beehive. And my favorite thing about Beehive is I'm just a big fan of Morning Brew. One of my buddies lives in New York when it launches and says, Marty, like this thing's great. I mean, he's probably like user number like 100. And he's like, you got to check out this newsletter. And I was like, oh, cool. I wasn't into the newsletter game. This thing is really good. And then they had their big exit. And then I've been following the team on Twitter, and Tyler is part of that team. I don't really know Tyler that well, but I think we hearted each other's stuff enough on Twitter that like he has some sense that like I exist in the world. So he put out a really cryptic tweet in August of like 22, I think, and just said like, ready to start working on the next big thing or starting something new. And I immediately DM'd him. It's like, whatever it is, man, I'm in. Because I'm assuming it's probably related to things he built in Morning Brew. And he wrote back immediately, LOL. And that was it. Ghosted me. I was like, oh, guess maybe not. And then it was like 3 months later, he's like, hey, I'm doing it. I'm going to raise some money. Are you interested? And I was, again, like, no context, but I'm like, yes, I'm in, man. Also, what is it? And what are the terms? And then, yeah, we got to get into Beehive pretty early, but really just building that relationship with Tyler.
That's awesome. Is that how you found a lot of the other investments as well? Because I saw you're in Uber, Coinbase, Roblox, SpaceX, some great companies.
Yeah, and some of them are through other funds. Some of them are joint, where like SpaceX is a good example. Like I don't have a direct line to Elon. I'm not on the cap table, but another fund manager
You don't have
is
a direct
able.
line yet. He's going to need agree.com pretty soon with all
That's
these
right.
contracts he wants to sign.
But another fund manager that I know gets in on SpaceX and says that he can reserve some allocation. And so I'm like, oh yeah, 100%. Like we're in, because SpaceX, we're early stage, and I was like, well, SpaceX not early stage, but it's $1 trillion company. So like Series A to like Series G is like basically their seed round. Like this thing's got so much further to go that we still consider it early stage. I think some of the like OpenAI's, Anthropics, Perplexities, we put them in that same kind of camp where like the letters, the scale of things, they change. They don't mean the same thing. So we have to like look at longer term horizons. And I don't think anyone expects 10-year IPOs out of these companies. I think they're probably going to build for 15, 20 years before like the massive unlock happens. And then it's the 10-year IPO, if they IPO at all.
I think it's been proven time and time again, right? People who are investing at like $1 billion plus valuations from early stage funds, obviously it can end in a different way, but when those companies go on to be $100 billion plus outcomes, it's still an early stage investment at $1 billion entry point. And I think that that's something that we're awakening to, having seen that kind of level of exit over the last 10 years, 15 years or so.
Yeah, but a lot of the investments, Twitter is like the best side of the deal flow. Another one I love is this guy, Andrew Gajecki, because he's just awesome on Twitter. He's so funny, but he's a build and public guy. But acquire.com is his business. But been following him forever. Just another entrepreneur that I liked and respected. And one day he's just cryptically like working on the next big thing. I'm like, dude, I want in, like whatever it is, hit me up. And my biggest trick to anyone who wants to angel invest or build their own sort of early stage fund is you got to talk to the engineering teams at like the smaller, big startups. So like right now, I'd say not like Brex and Mercury, but like Ramp. Like Ramp's on its way, Rose on its way, right? Find the engineering team there because they're hiring young engineers. And then what I want is it's their coworker, right? When Steve, two like chairs down, is putting in their notice, and you're like, oh, Steve, why are you quitting? It's like, oh, I'm going to go start a startup. That, like, I want the introduction, right? Like, I talk about pre-calculus. I want pre-formation. Like there's certain things we can't talk about, like evaluations and stuff, but like, tell me you're going to start something. Tell me the vertical. And then as soon as you get the formation going, you got the 83B, like let's hit the races. I want to be first in on this thing.
I love it. I love it. Will you do that as like a lead, or like without another lead? You just kind of write a check when you believe?
At these stages in my size, like there is either no lead or it's just like whoever's big check in. So the value I'm usually at is not, because again, $10 million fund, like biggest check. I mean, we can write like a $250,000 check, but realistic biggest check's like 150,000. So it's pretty small, all things considered, but it's first to conviction. So like, okay, if let's say you are raising a $1.5 million, if Marty puts in 150, like you're 10% of the way there. Like optically, like that's the compounding interest you need. Like, this is great. Thanks, Marty. Like, glad to have you on board.
We've only got a few minutes left. I want to ask, what you've given some great pieces of advice for founders listening. What would you consider to be the best conventional wisdom that people don't take, the underappreciated wisdom that's out there?
So there's one, I'll answer with a question, or the answer that all the founders want to hear, because the real answer nobody wants to hear, which kind of annoys the hell out of me, is I think everybody really just wants like a magic bullet. It's like I want to shed 50 pounds. And then we all know, like, hit the gym, eat healthier, change habits. Like that's what you have to do. It's like, no, I just want you to tell me like you have some secret that you do. Oh, you know what it is? I sleep 8.5 hours and I drink a bunch of water. It's like, oh, that's all I got to do. Like, no, that's not all you got to do. And so they want that same thing with like building a company or fundraising. It's like, no, man, it's patience and it's practice, and you got to go at it and you got to fail a bunch of times. You got to get back up and you got to do it an exhaustive amount of times over an exhaustive period of time. And I think everyone wants to go into like their first pitch and get their investor. It's like, that's not the way it works. And this will speak to the actual advice I think will be helpful. Conventional wisdom is you have to hear 100 no's to get a yes. I think that's bullshit, but it is close. You have to practice your pitch 100 times, and it has to be a real practice. I don't mean you in front of Zoom by yourself or you in front of your mom or your significant other. Like, that's not a practice. I need you to really pitch I need you to embarrass the shit out of yourself. I need you to be so embarrassed that you think like you're blackballed from Silicon Valley because that pitch went so bad. Because the reality is, whatever question they ask, whatever they threw at you, like, you're going to nail it next time because it's going to be in your head. It's going to be eating at you. It's like, shit, I could have answered that. Like, as soon as you walk out of that meeting, you're going to be like, oh, I have the perfect answer. Can we go back? Can we redo? But that's fine. And this is also like, I'd be strategic with those pitches. Like the big ones that you're not going to land anyway. Like if you're raising a pre-seed and you're first time founder and like you get to talk to someone at A16Z, unlikely they're going to come in. They might, but like take that meeting right away. They're going to ask you like the very standard questions. And so you're going to learn what that's like and you're going to embarrass yourself in front of them. And then like the smaller fund that's more likely to come into this round, you're going to kill it. So get 100 pitches and perfect it on the 101 pitch.
Yeah, get your reps in. I always talk about that with new investors where I'm like, just get your reps in as quickly as possible on the investing side. It sounds like the opposite is also true, right? Get as many pitches as you can in and it keep iterating.
Like you're doing this podcast here. So the one thing that I found when I talk to folks that are very successful on the influencer side, they're all the same. They have vlogs or podcasts. They all say the exact same thing. They're like, how long have you been doing this for? How many have you recorded? And they've got thousands of them. And they all preface with, don't ever, and they don't delete any of them, but they never want you to go watch the first one, right? Because the first one is so embarrassing. The lighting's off, the sound's bad, the background's horrible. Their mom's walking by in the background and like she wasn't supposed to be. They messed everything up. But it's interesting to me that they don't delete it, right? They keep it because they know numbers matter. But two, like and I think most podcasters, young kids who want to like be an influencer, they go to Amazon and they buy the best lighting setup and they buy the best camera and like they try to mimic the 1,000th professional video on their first video. And that's not the way any of the professional videographers or podcasters started. So like start like they started. And I think founders should do the same thing. Don't think that your first pitch and your first meeting, you're going to kill it like an experienced founder would.
Yeah. Don't wait, just start. Let's take the inverse. What is the conventional wisdom that people are following that you think is wrong, that's leading people astray?
Yeah, I hate to cheat because we already kind of alluded to this one, but don't talk to investors unless you're fundraising. I think that's a pretty, because there's 3 reasons why. First one is, the other one that I kind of hate that's big on Twitter is don't waste your time with associates. Just to get yourself on a partner. If you're a first time founder, you're not getting a partner call. Like you're lucky if you do. Like don't be a dick to the associate, man, because the reality, this is a long-term game. This probably shouldn't be your last startup. Hopefully it's not. And 10 years from now, when you're raising for that like third startup after this one, that associate's the general partner at a fund that has like 100 million under management. Like they're gonna remember you, man, because you built that relationship. Because you don't pitch them and never talk to them again, and you don't just talk to them about this startup and this fundraise. You engage on LinkedIn, you slide into their team every now and then, you congratulate them when they got that new job. Like it's a long game when you build that relationship. That's one. 2, you're a founder, you're fundraising, you're meeting a bunch of other founders, they're fundraising. So if you're not fundraising right now, like you talk to those investors because you can introduce them to your other friend founders. And then the third one that I alluded to a little bit was, I call it the reverse pitch. If a pitch goes poorly, like walk away and fix it. If the pitch doesn't go poorly, you need to have an ask. And that ask at the end of this, every one of these bigger funds, they have some kind of marketplace for their portfolio companies. Your website, your product better be on that marketplace, right? And this is the good thing about Agree is I've never met a marketplace that wasn't alphabetical. So like I'm always top 3, which is great. But the other one is, hey, you've got a portco and you've got hundreds of companies and those are my target customers. Like introduce me to 3. Right? Introduce me to 3 as an early customer or a design partner. And like, if they're not willing to do that, right? If they're not willing to introduce you to any one of their portcos, guess what? They were never going to invest. So you've just immediately found out like you're wasting your time with them. But if you do take that call, you build a relationship and hey, you might get 3 customers out of it.
That's fantastic advice. I love that. All right. We've got the lightning round here. Just a few questions before we wrap it up. First one, what food would you eat if you can only eat one food for the rest of your life?
I think I just got to go with the classic, man. Pizza. I got to just stick with my pizza. I love pizza.
What are your toppings? Are you a cheese guy or you like certain toppings?
I'm super boring and plain. I love pepperoni and cheese.
The classic. You can't go wrong.
Classic.
What's the hardest lesson you've had to learn in your career?
The hardest. Oh man, there's so many. I've fumbled and I've screwed up. The hardest lesson, I would say, the most important one that's the hardest is, because I'm still struggling with it today, is this is gonna sound like an ego thing, but like I'm really good at figuring out like from start to finish what it needs to be and getting there pretty quickly. And I feel like my approach is a little bit more creative than the average person's. And so that's, people like this story. And when I sell that A to B, I'm pretty good storyteller. And people are like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, yeah, signatures and payments, they're disjointed. But then when you bring that back to a team that actually needs to execute on that, I kind of forget to fill in the blanks. And you got to fill those blanks in because like it's not about the roadmap. I always say like it's about the road trip. And like that road trip is really important. Like the people that you're stuck in that car with to go across the country, like the path you're going to take and why you're going to take it and like all the bumps along the way. I'm really bad at forgetting to slow down. I like to talk fast, I like to move fast, but like slow down, remind people like why we're here, why it matters, why like down the granularity, man, down to the feature, why this feature freaking matters, why it's on the priority list against the other priorities.
I've heard that from so many founders that you got to repeat the mission or the prime objective over and over and over again. You'll say it 20 times, and some people still don't have it embedded in their mind the way it is in yours. And it's really hard to over-index on that. It sounds like
Yeah.
that's kind of the same realm. Okay, what's been the best moment in your business life?
Okay, there's a favorite story that I have. So I am undergrad at University of Maryland, a computer science major, but I love design. And I got this like, spirit for business, even though I don't know an entrepreneur yet, but they let me take a bunch of courses outside of my core like capstone. And so I get to take a design course and I get to take like a 300 level one, even though I didn't take the prereqs. And the other designers are like, they're a little pissed because they'd never seen me before. Like I just walked in, they knew like this is actually a pretty hard class to get in. This professor's pretty hard to get in. So like they're already kind of like, who the fuck's this guy? But the badass professor that everybody wanted, she got pregnant and she's not going to teach this semester. And so they have an adjunct coming in. Everyone's pissed because this is the professor. And I'm pissed because this is my one shot to get in this really hard class. And now I secretly know why I got in because there was an open slot because someone waited till she comes back. But this adjunct turned out to be really cool because she'd never really taught before. And so she brings in speakers to kind of help fill the time and make it seem cool and engaging. One of those speakers was the creative director at Discovery Channel. And he was doing a corporate 3-on-3 basketball tournament with Nike. And they needed a logo. And so he said, hey, I've looked at your guys' stuff. You're pretty good. I'm going to make you a deal. We're going to do a contest and I'm going to pick a winner. And like one winner will be the logo for this corporate 3-on-3. And this is the Fortune 100. So all Fortune 100 companies so like everyone's going to see this and Nike's going to print this on everything. And this is the year Maryland won the national championship. So it's going to be at Maryland. So this is a big deal. And I mean, obviously, lo and behold, I win. But I'm not by any means the best designer. I'm not classically trained like the rest of them. I didn't take all the prereqs and all that kind of stuff. But the lesson is at the end, there's these two women in the class who are like awesome. Like I'm like, huge design crush on their work. And one of them comes up to me and like she's kind of like storms up to me. I'm kind of like scared, nervous. And she like looks me right in the face and she goes, you know what, Marty? Super aggressive tone. And she goes, I don't think yours was better. I think you talked about it better. And I was like, we're like 30 years in, this has not left me, where I'm like, holy shit. Like the power of sales is like so critical. It's like, especially as a designer, to articulate why my design concept was the winning concept. And I sold her, even though like subjectively hers was a better aesthetic, like presentation of like a logo design. I won just because of like being a better narrator, better storyteller. And I think like for founders and that's critical, like to sell for recruiting, to get investors on board, to get your first customers, your first design partners, you got to be a really good storyteller. But I think that's why I'm one today, because I keep building that skill, because with her comment to me, it never left me. It's like, holy shit, that's powerful.
Yeah. That's wow. What a great story. And it's kind of recursive or like meta in a way in terms of the story itself. Okay. Last question for you. Who has helped you the most in your career?
Well, I mean, this again. I don't think this is going to meet the spirit of your question, but it's Evan and Mike, like these two dudes who have been with me for 15 years now. I almost feel bad saying that because my original co-founder in the first company, Alex, him and I had been together for so long. He's just living like the good retired life now. He's got his place in Noe Valley, and he's not up for the follow me on a crazy next adventure. But I would have said him. But Evan and Mike, like what I love is Mike started as my intern, and he just keeps like I say like, hey, let's do something, or he's doing something, say, Marty, you want in? And that just tells me that as fast as I move and as hard-headed as I can be, and there's probably some people on Twitter that think I'm less than a great person, some people who think I'm funny, I can't be all that bad. Because why do these guys keep coming back, right? Like time and time again. And with any team, you get conflict, and you get times that you're upset at each other, you don't like each other, but like we bounce back from it. And I appreciate that. And so it's been fun to have a team that comes back time and time again, because it tells me something about my own leadership skills. Not that evil at the true core of it all.
Yeah, yeah. There's something about continuity and deeper friendships in business that I think everyone resonates with and cares a lot about when they have it. And if they don't have it, they're probably envious of it. So,
I know people don't want to hear this, but man, in office, it's so critical, because like there's a big difference between the job and the work. And yes, your work can get done remotely from home, but the job is building relationships. And this is a long game, man. And I really strongly believe you build these lifelong relationships when you're in person. I know everyone under the age of 30 is rolling their eyes and like they just instantly tuned me out. And that's fine.
no, they'll learn. They'll learn one way or another. Cool. Marty, thanks for all the stories, the wisdom. This has been an amazing episode. I appreciate you joining us.
No, man, thanks for having me. This has been fun.
Thanks again for tuning in to this episode of Money Moves. If you learned something new or just loved this episode, click below to subscribe. See you next week.